Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today and welcome to our podcast. Today we're going to be talking about some really important subjects, and that is all about Martin's Law and its impact on schools. Welcome everyone and thank you so much for tuning in today. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan from Head Teacher Chat.
Morning.
And we've also got Lawrence from Team SOS.
Hi there.
And Lisa, who is an independent consultant for schools. Morning everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Brilliant, and thank you so much for joining us. It's really helpful to have experts who know about this information to come and talk to schools, because we are in schools, we are so busy, we have so many things on our plate, and it's very difficult to have the time and the presence of mind to actually focus on something which is becoming, sadly, more and more important in today's lifestyle and society. So, Lawrence, you are an expert because you've been in digital technology for a long time, haven't you?
Absolutely. I was the founder of Group Call some 25 years ago, and we've been providing software and technology for schools ever since. Fantastic.
So we've got all of your knowledge about using technology to help us in schools, which is great to hear. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we've also got Lisa, who is an expert in the field too. Lisa, do you want to tell us something?
Yeah, sure. My name's Lisa Broad, and I've got a long background in government service, 22 years government service, working predominantly in the fields of counter-terrorism, but latterly at the Department for Education, supporting the education sector, start to consider the risk from terrorism and serious violence.
Yeah, so it's a sad world that we're in now, that we have to consider these things, but unfortunately we are needing to consider these things more and more. And I know that we're going to be chatting about Martin's Law now with Jonathan. Jonathan, did you want to ask about what it means to schools?
Yeah, and I'm just going to say a little bit about in the community. This is mentioned quite a few times. Actually, there was a post last night in our Facebook group talking about lockdown, what the procedures are, how they're doing all the risk assessments, how they're doing everything about lockdown. So it is a timely topic for everyone. So first of all, it's sort of like, I'm not really sure that every school leader knows what Martin's Law. Do you want to explain how it came about and all the information about Martin's Law?
Yes, of course. So Martin's Law essentially is named after Martin Hett, who was one of the 22 victims of the Manchester Arena attack. Martin's mum, a lady called Fegan Murray, has campaigned tirelessly for years now to put in place legislation that will protect people going about their daily business. So essentially, it is in the same way that we consider health and safety. It's part of life now, isn't it? Settings on certain venues, which include schools, will be expected to consider the risk from terrorism at their sites. So there are different levels of the legislation, tiers, if you will. For schools, the only part of the legislation that schools need to consider is what's called the standard tier. Bigger, other more complicated places will have to do some other stuff, including counter-terrorism risk assessment. Schools won't need to do that at all. So it's really important that that's understood. For schools that are already very much focused on safeguarding their communities, their populations, it was agreed that it was proportionate to sit everyone within the standard tier of the duty. And what that means is that any currently, and this legislation is yet to be agreed, finalised in the House of Lords, but we're nearly there. But what it will mean is that any school that has a maximum capacity of over 200, which is a lot of schools, most schools, apart from smaller schools in this country. I'm really sorry. I'm just going to stop for a second, but I can hear lots of.
So, Lisa, can you explain a little bit more about Martin's Law for school leaders?
Yes, of course. So Martin's Law is forthcoming legislation that's currently in the final stages of been going through the Houses of Parliament, so will very soon be enacted. And it's legislation that has been driven by the mother of one of the victims of the Manchester Arena attack. So Martin Hett's mother has campaigned tirelessly for many years now for the government to put in place legislation that better protects people going about their daily business. And essentially what Martin's Law will do is mandate for certain venues, premises, including schools, to consider the risk from terrorism. It'll be in the same way that we all have to consider health and safety, we'll now have to consider terrorism. Now, there are two tiers to this proposed duty. I must say it's called Martin's Law. It's also known as the Protect Duty. School leaders will be very aware of the Prevent Duty. This is the Protect Duty, but the official name is the Terrorism Protection of Premises Bill. So really important that everybody understands that they're all the same thing. What it will mean, there are two tiers, but for schools, all schools that are within scope of the duty will sit within the standard tier. There's an enhanced tier for other premises within scope, different sectors, but it was agreed, and I can tell you this as a matter of fact because it was me that did this in collaboration with colleagues across the sector when I was still working in government. It was agreed that because schools all have to adhere to quite strict safeguarding legislation that's already in place, they're already much safer than locations such as nightclubs, restaurants, cinemas, and so on. So all schools within scope, and to be in scope means that you need to have over 200 maximum capacity in your school. If you have over 200, you'll be in scope of the duty. And it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 pupils or 205, you will be in scope of the duty, but you will all sit within the standard tier. And what that means is that you'll need to have in place some measures to respond to an incident were it to occur.
I mean, yeah, and what are the biggest challenges then for schools at the moment within this then? Because most schools have lockdown procedures, they do the drills every term, they have to record it, and most schools will probably say that they're doing most of this anyway.
So I think that's a really good point, and I think from my experience, I think that schools have historically, there is currently no statutory requirement on schools to do this stuff. Schools that do this stuff well are normally the schools that either consider themselves to be of particular high risk, maybe because of the cohort of students, pupils that are there, or perhaps they're in a high-risk location where they need to consider incidents that might take place nearby central London, for example. Other schools that do this stuff quite well, sadly, those schools that have had security incidents or have had to put in place measures to ensure that they don't happen again. Martin's Law is very much about terrorism. From an education perspective, it is my opinion that Martin's Law is great. It really needs to happen, but not because there's a terrorist threat to schools, but because schools need more support and need to be able to have in place effective plans and be able to do that. And I think one of the issues currently is that for those schools that don't sit in with that group that I've just talked about, the high-risk schools, the schools that have already had security incidents, is that they might download a template for lockdown from an educational platform, but actually, were an incident to happen, it wouldn't be effective at all. So, you amazing people that work in schools are educators, you're safeguarders, you're doing all these 1,000 things. Where do you get that expertise, that counterterrorism expertise? How do you know about emergency response? How do you do that? And currently there's no real support for you to get those plans right. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I think, most schools do have those plans now because they feel that they need to do, but whether those plans are any good, we don't know. And we don't want to be in a situation where something terrible happens and actually we find out that those plans didn't work at all. So there's a real gap in terms of guidance and support. And it's really difficult as well because, you know, from a government or counter-terrorism policing perspective, it's very, very difficult to give bespoke guidance across every, you know, the thousands and thousands of schools that we've got in this country. And when it comes to things like emergency response, lockdown, what have you, it's very much dependent on the infrastructure at that setting. So they can give principles, but those principles need to be translated to that infrastructure. And every school is different. I mean, you'll know, won't you? You can't, I as a consultant now go into schools, and one school, maybe new build schools that tend to be a little bit more and kind of upstairs and downstairs are the same and a bit easier to work through those plans. But then there are other schools like my children's school where I'm chair of governors that, you know, it's been added on bits and bobs here, there, everywhere. Part of the building's hundreds of years old, part of the building, you know, is falling down, and, you know, it's just complex. It's really difficult to give that guidance.
It is very much about the context of the school. I've been in many schools and supported schools, and one of the things we do when we start going into school is a lockdown procedure and actually look at it. Does it work? And go through all those ones. It's probably changed in the last couple of years. So Lawrence, on your perspective, what is there anything else you want to add about Martin's Law?
Well, I mean, I might argue that schools might have lockdown procedures in place that they created because they were told that they needed them some time ago. But I think that fire drills are definitely practiced, but I would imagine that lockdown drills are practiced much less. Yeah, and I think that the Martin's Law is there's certainly a responsibility on schools to practice these things, and I think that's a critical element of, you know, that schools need to do, and they will need to evidence that, and that's where we come in with in the things that we provide, helping to evidence that schools have actually practiced Martin's Law.
So yeah, and schools really need to act now, don't they? I mean, this is the crucial thing. Is actually we need to start putting these plans in place, and everything is showing that this, with all the things that schools are facing at the moment, actually this is important for schools to focus on it now. And you've had some experience of that, Lisa, haven't you, of why schools need to do it right now, and it's every school that needs to do it.
Certainly, and I think, you know, Martin's Law is an amazing piece of legislation across our country. It will ultimately make our country much safer. But for schools, to me, it's so important, not just because of terrorism. And I think that's the key bit. So yeah, Martin's Law hopefully will be enacted before the anniversary of the Manchester Arena attacks this year. There'll then be a period of time before which the regulator, because there will be a regulator, although for those within the standard tier, hopefully it will take a supportive role rather than it being a knock on the door from like an Ofsted inspection. But I think the key thing, if I had to say anything to schools today, is, you know, don't wait until, oh, well, we have to have it done by this date. This is about safeguarding your communities. This is about kids in crisis, staff members in crisis, kids with knives. It's, you know, it's not necessarily dealing with terrorism. It's protecting our children from, you know, life today, really, and protecting our staff and everything. So get these plans in place, make sure that the plans are effective. And they don't need to be complicated. It's really important. Having a lockdown plan that is 57 pages is no good to anybody because nobody's going to recollect it. You need to have a really clear plan. Everybody knows what to do. There is a security threat. How do we tell everybody about it? Number one, how do people know? And then two, what do we need to do? In the same way that if a fire bell goes, we know, leave our bags, walk, don't run, leave the building as soon as possible. It's that simple, clear stuff that schools need to be thinking through.
Yeah, and in some ways that into the final part is actually what do schools now need to do? And in some ways you're answering those sort of questions. Actually, it's not a 57-page report on risk assessments of lockdown and things like that. It's a whole culture within the school of how they operate when an incident happens, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think having systems in place, that's one of the things that we provide is the ability to communicate in an incident, and really in a lockdown. And, you know, this is, as Lisa said, this is coming much sooner than everybody thought. You know, I think that there was, you know, all credit to the government and obviously Fegan Murray pushing very hard and making something happen, which was really important. And, you know, as I say, I think people thought it was going to happen sort of later on in the year, and it's probably going to happen this month or next. And so schools are really waking up to this right now, and the ability to communicate was one of the really the four pillars of the points in Martin's Law, the standard tier. You know, having the ability to lock down, evacuate and evacuate the school, but fundamentally communicating during those situations, those types of incidents. And the school bell, you know, ringing the school bell in 2 or 3 different ways is not an appropriate solution anymore. Yeah. So, you know, we came in to help people communicate, to help people record in a very simple way within our system the things that happen, because lockdowns don't just actually happen. There's something that happens before that. Yeah, where, you know, you see someone jump over the fence, or, you know, you're concerned about someone roaming around the fields of the school, or whatever it happens to be. And so the ability to call for help and say, you know, I've seen someone, I'm not sure I like the look of them. And then that escalates to the school and the senior management team being able to decide, well, yeah, this is a lockdown and I need to inform everybody, and I need a really simple way of doing that. And especially very simple in the moment when there's pressure, right? And so again, that's something that we help with, and help that everyone can use whatever device they happen to have to be able to say, actually, whether they're in the school or outside the school, I want to lock down. Yeah, and that community being able to communicate to all the members of staff and make it pop up on their screen, whatever they're doing, and so that they can see a message and know that there's an intruder, for example, in the school and they need to lock down. And even with the ability to respond back, you know, I think that there's mass communication is really the answer for you know, in terms of Martin's Law, and it's what it's requiring really in terms of things like lockdowns. But mass communication has to be two-way for it to be really effective, because how do you react to a situation unless people can feed back to you and tell you that there's a person there and he's there now, and actually we're going to do something different now. Yeah, and that we help with all of that, and sort of provide systems to schools very inexpensively that work with every MIS and fundamentally help them record and document and comply with all the requirements of Martin's Law.
So Lawrence, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. Communication needs to be two ways. You know, if you are in an emergency situation, and you've got children at different ends of the school, members of staff at different ends of the school, a lot of schools have a no mobile phone policy. So a lot of staff members have to put their mobile phone in the staff room and lock it away there. So there's no way of communicating to the office unless they come out of their classroom and walk down to the office and speak to them physically. Or if they're lucky enough, and many schools don't have this anymore, we used to, but not so much nowadays, if they've got a telephone in the classroom. So the reassurance to know that actually there are systems out there where if you are in that situation and you are the person that's spotted that there's an issue, you can message the office, the powers that be, that have the ability to go into lockdown, and without putting yourself or your children that you're looking after at risk, which is really, really important. And I think that's great. And can you tell us a little bit about the system that you've developed? Because it's really clever, and I'd love to hear what it looks like in school, what it does, and how it works.
Sure. how long you got, right? But the thing is that Team SOS runs on any device. Yeah. So where you talk about, some people do block their phones away, but there is actually a change now. And we've seen it in the last 6 to 9 months where schools are allowing staff much more to use their devices, and they can if they want to, and the staff obviously want to. Team SOS will run on mobile devices, but it runs on anything that school have, and typically schools will always have very commonly a Windows PC in every classroom, or a laptop and whatever, and everyone has use of that to work with their interactive whiteboard or whatever. And people often also have things like iPads or Android tablets and things like that. And sometimes they've got Chromebooks, but for the staff, Team SOS will run on anything they have, and everything they have, actually, interestingly, because we don't really count the devices, so we don't worry if you've got it on 1 or 2 or 5 different things that you happen to have as a user, because hey, it's an emergency, you shouldn't have to worry if you put it on there or not. And so we do that. So whatever people have, they can actually create an incident, and that is, there's a button on the screen. There's just one button, and you tap it, and it says call for help, and you just very simply say what you need help with. And as I said before, it could be that you've seen someone jump over the fence, and if you did have a phone, you could have taken a photo of them or whatever it was, and you feed that through. And if you were rushing and you didn't want to type, you can speak like a walkie-talkie into the product as well, and it transcribes it and converts it to text, which is interesting and useful because this is all evidence, right? Everything that happens is evidence, whether you've typed it, whether you've said it, you want it kept and recorded, and that's what Team SOS does. So there might be, and that's quite unique with us, there's a conversation, if you like, that happens between whoever is the response team at the school. So the person who sees that person jump over the fence, or the intruder, they push a button, and it will automatically inform all of the members of staff at the school who are responsible, or the response team, senior management team, with special sounds on their devices, not like Teams and not like email, where it's another blip and another blop or whatever it is, and you don't know if it's important or not, and that's what we have, a special sound, and so people can identify that very clearly, and then they're brought into a conversation, and that's where you decide whether there's something serious or not. And that's again one of our uniquenesses, that is before the lockdown, right? But actually before a lockdown happens, when lockdowns never just happened, it's something happens first, and we record all of that. Then if the head teacher, or whoever it is, wherever they are, because they don't have to be in school particularly, because Team SOS works on mobile devices too, they could see what's going on and make a decision that they need to protect the students and staff by locking down, push a button, and it will send a notification to all of their devices, all of the staff, to tell them what's going on, that there's someone jumped over the back fence, or there's someone, or they're locking down the school actually. And in that process, they can check everyone's okay, which is really important, because excuse me, it triggers the two-way conversation part on where you referred to, because we very strongly believe that for something to really be effective, it can't be a one-way conversation. That's just a tannoy. That's just shouting the message out there, right? But that doesn't mean that someone can say, he's here, right? He's here. He's trying to get in here. So, you guys over there, we can, with Team SOS, you can say, lock down building number 1, and everyone evacuate, everyone else in building number 2, evacuate away from building number 1. And then we giving the people the ability to respond and tell us they're not okay, actually, and why. Right, allows us in a very controlled way, in an aggregated way, where all the responses come to one place. It's not like you're getting a million emails about stuff or a million Teams messages about stuff. In a very controlled and organized way, everyone will respond back to you. You know who's okay, you know who's not okay. You can adjust according to the situation. That's two-way, right? That makes the difference fundamentally on what we provide, and we feel it's absolutely essential to react to a situation, to have that ability. And then finally, at the end of an incident, and when all of our, when an incident's going, we've sent all of these notifications that pop up on the screen, that take over the screen, so that they can't be ignored and have a special sound as well. And at the end of that situation, when hopefully everyone's safe and it was, you know, the man's been apprehended or it was a false alarm or whatever, when we close the incident, with the person who's in charge closes the incident, all of those notifications disappear automatically off of all of the machines. And those notifications come up, by the way, even if the machines are not even logged in. So you're definitely going to know about it. You're definitely going to know about it wherever you are. And that's the importance of a lockdown system and a notification system, and that really ticks the box for Martin's Law, really, because that's what it's asking people to provide.
That's really good. I mean, just to clarify, because we have a lot of school leaders and we have some new school leaders that we talk to all the time about lockdown. What would be the practical steps to put in place or to get ready for Martin's Law?
I think.
Shall I come in there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
I'll start, and then Lawrence can go in from a TMSOS perspective, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think 3 key things Lawrence just touched upon. The draft bill itself covers 4 elements, pillars. Evacuation. Now, everybody will already have in place evacuation plans for accidental fire. Martin's Law is about terrorism, countering terrorism. So I would say to school leaders, look at your existing plans that you have in place through the lens of worst case scenario, terrorist attack. It's not going to be a terrorist attack, touch wood, that won't happen. But from a Martin's Law perspective, you need to consider these things. So it's evacuation and lockdown. Those 2 things are very closely linked, and I'll mention that in a second. And then communication, as Lawrence has just said. So from an evacuation perspective, in the very simplest terms, you've got your fire evacuation plan, but have you also got an evacuation plan for something more sinister? So do you have plans in place for bomb threats and for evacuation because of a credible bomb threat? Do you have in place evacuation plans or at least an understanding that actually a fire bell, let's say that a fire bell after suspicious behaviour, after a hoax call, after smelling fumes or something like this, we might not want to evacuate to a pre-designated assembly point that everybody knows, because sometimes people with sinister intent, and there's been examples of this in the past in the UK, have plotted to bring people outside to an assembly point, which is actually the secondary target attack site. So thinking through that stuff, it's horrible to think through, but so much better to think through in peacetime, have those plans in place, and hopefully you'll never have to use them. So from an evacuation perspective, it's look at those evacuation plans, and were something to happen, bomb threats are really, really common across the education sector. So I think most people should have those plans in place, a checklist, what to do if somebody calls and there's a bomb threat or there's an email, but then what you do in terms of evacuation. Do you know your safe distances from suspicious packages, things like that? And all this information is out there already. So that's your evacuation stuff. So just reviewing your plans, would they work in this situation? But from a lockdown perspective, if you've got a lockdown plan already, review it through worst case scenario lens. It's no good having your 57-page document, no way of communicating across the school. Staff don't really know it. They've read it when they first joined the school, but they've never looked at it again. What do you need to do? Think through where the threat might be. I always advise clients, there could be a threat outside the perimeter of school, a threat on the school grounds, a threat inside the school. All of those 3 things require a different response. So think through what you do in those circumstances, because what you don't want is for the caretaker always to run outside and lock the perimeter. If the threat's inside the school, you're just wasting time there. You just, you need to think through your plans and make sure that you understand, and everybody understands how they'd work in that situation. But the final thing is being able to communicate, 1, the alert, so the response that's needed, and then 2, as Lauren said, being able to communicate during an alert. And just on the team of SOS, I think one thing that I see when I talk to schools and colleges, there's real nervousness about lockdown becoming a response to behavioural issues. a kid's in crisis, throwing a chair around or something, quick lockdown. And it becomes almost the norm as a response to a behavioural incident that probably doesn't require a lockdown. And I think what Team SOS does is allow that initial conversation to establish whether you need to lock down. And I think that's really important as well. Sorry, Lawrence.
No, thank you. I mean, and that is quite a crux of it, is that, it provides a channel for people to call for help, right, before lockdown. And so you can see where you are and whether you need to go into a lockdown or you don't, and that fundamentally. But in terms of from our side, preparing is practicing, actually, right? That's, because Team SOS is very easy to put in for schools and very inexpensive, right? But what's, for schools to really prepare for Martin's Law, Team SOS has a drill function in there. When schools do a drill, it's recorded, and that's also what you need to be doing going forwards for Martin's Law. And you really, to prepare, practice, not frighten the students, and so they're ready for these situations, which, again, going all the way back, it's not only terrorism. There's lots of reasons why people need to lock down nowadays, and the world's changed a bit, and so this thing is in a way is timely to help out and make schools have the right systems in place to help them when things happen.
Super.
Yeah. So, how from your experience, Lisa, how has the schools responded to Team SOS then?
Well, it's hard for me to say. I don't work for Team SOS, just to be completely clear. I'm an independent consultant. I've seen Lawrence with a group of head teachers who seemed really encouraged by Team SOS, but I think Lawrence is probably the best person to respond to that. Forgive me.
Thanks, Lisa. The thing that we did was that we together, actually, the time Lisa's referring to is that we went and presented to a group of 20 schools, and they were, primary schools, actually, in the Lake District of places, and they, you're not sure all the things that would happen there, right, or what problems you see in the quiet Lake District, if you see what I mean. And yet they were also conscious about Martin's Law, and there were schools there who were less than 100 students and obviously much bigger, but they saw the need to have something in place which recorded everything they did and allowed them to comply with this and evidenced everything they did, even the tiny schools where you think you could just shout, right, but it's important to have something in place and evidence everything. And so that's the reaction to Team SOS has been amazing, in terms of, from the smallest school, I have to say it's very inexpensive, and so we try and price it for everybody, right, because everyone should be able to have such a thing in place, such a protection in place, and these abilities. And so even the smallest schools to the very largest schools and trusts where we've deployed it are seeing sort of the benefits and also the comfort of having a security system in place that you just can't ignore, and that everyone will know wherever they are, whatever device they're holding, they'll know what's going on, and it helps them to be protected.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I loved what you've both come up with. You've both come up with some super tips for our head teachers and school leaders to take away. So, Lawrence, I think your product, Team SOS, is such a clever and effective way to communicate that there is an emergency situation in hand. And that is exactly what Martin's Law is all about. It's all about effective, impactful ways to communicate that there's an emergency, an issue in school. So I love the fact that teachers and leaders can communicate with each other. It's a two-way conversation. It's a lot more effective than just pressing the fire alarm button if there's an emergency in school. So yeah, fabulous. We'll put your details underneath this podcast recording. So if anybody's interested in finding out more about Team SOS, you can contact them via the link below. And Lisa, your tips for leaders are so helpful. Thank you so much for making it so clear, because it's quite worrying if you're a new leader or a new head teacher and you know you've got to do this important stuff, but you haven't got enough time to think about it or put it into place. You've outlined it very clearly, and I'm sure that's really helped everybody. If they have any questions, are they able to get in contact with you as well?
Yes, of course. Please do. And I'll always do my best to help.
Thank you so much. We'll put your details underneath too. So if you want to get in contact with Lisa, I'm sure she'd be very helpful coming into school and giving you a hand if you need some support in that respect. So really good topic today, really helpful. Lots of key takeaways, lots of things to think about. But I suppose in summary, from my perspective, I would say try and keep it simple. You know, in an emergency situation, you are going to need to be able to think very clearly and very calmly. So when that does happen, you need to know what to do. And your members of your colleagues around you also need to know what to do. So the simpler you can all make it together, and the more you practice it, as Lawrence says, the more you practice those drills, the better and easier it will be. And it's, you know, and then those times will be much smoother and a lot less stressful, hopefully, fingers crossed. And it will make it a lot nicer situation to be in. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.